In 1933, the United States went off the gold standard. The same year, the federal government made birth registration mandatory in all 48 states. I spent 3 months trying to find out if those two events are connected. What I found was worse than a connection. It was a filing system. Your birth certificate is not what you think it is. It is not a memento. It is not a family keepsake. It is a government-issued document, printed on security paper, assigned a unique serial number, filed with the state's Office of Vital Statistics, and registered with the federal government through a reporting chain that terminates at the Department of Commerce. Not the Department of Health. Not the Department of Family Services. The Department of Commerce. The same department that tracks imports, exports, trade balances, and economic output. I need to be clear about something before I go further. There is a theory about this. A theory that has attracted a large and passionate following. A theory that claims your birth certificate is a bond, a security, a financial instrument worth millions, and that the government has been trading on your identity since the day you were born. I am not going to endorse that theory. Parts of it are unverifiable. Parts of it rely on legal interpretations that courts have consistently rejected. But I am also not going to pretend that the filing system makes sense, because I have spent 3 months inside it, and it does not. And the questions it raises are real, even if the most extreme answers are wrong. Let me show you what I found. The United States did not always register births. This is the fact that started everything, because it contradicts a basic assumption most Americans hold, that birth registration is ancient, fundamental, a bedrock function of government that has existed since the founding. It has not. The first American birth registration law was passed in Massachusetts in 1639. It required towns to record births, deaths, and marriages. Compliance was sporadic. Enforcement was minimal. For most of the colonial and early republic period, the recording of births was a church function, not a state function. Baptismal records served as the primary evidence that a person had been born. If you were not baptized, or if you were baptized in a church that kept poor records, or if the church burned down, which happened with remarkable frequency, there was no official documentation of your existence. The first attempt at comprehensive national birth registration came in 1900, when the Census Bureau established the death registration area, a system that would eventually expand to cover births as well. But participation was voluntary. States could join the birth registration area by demonstrating that they were recording at least 90% of births within their borders. The process was slow. By 1915, only 10 states and the District of Columbia had met the threshold. By 1920, the number had grown to 22 states. By 1929, it was 42 states. The last 6 states, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, New Mexico, Alaska, and Nevada, did not achieve compliance until the early 1930s. Texas, the largest of the holdouts, did not require birth registration by law until 1933. Let me frame what that means. For the first 157 years of American history, birth registration was optional, incomplete, church-based, or non-existent. Millions of Americans born before 1900 have no government-issued birth certificate at all. They were born, they lived, they worked, they voted, they died. And the state never officially acknowledged their arrival. They were, in the language of the previous investigation, illegible. The state could not see them at birth. It could only see them later, when they were counted in a census, when they bought property, when they registered to vote, when they enlisted in the military. Their existence was confirmed by their actions, not by a document issued at birth. And then, over a remarkably compressed timeline, roughly 1900 to 1933, every state in the Union was brought into compliance. By 1933, every American birth was required to be registered with the state, documented on a standardized form, assigned a file number, and reported to the federal government. The question is why? What changed in the early 20th century that made universal birth registration suddenly necessary? What purpose did it serve that 157 years of American governance had managed without? The official answer is public health. Birth registration allowed the government to track infant mortality, monitor epidemics, and plan healthcare resources. This is true. These were genuine benefits. I do not dispute them. But public health does not explain the filing system. Public health does not explain where the documents go after they leave the hospital. Here is what happens to your birth certificate after you are born. A birth certificate is created at the hospital or birthing facility. It is signed by the attending physician or midwife and by at least one parent. It is then sent to the county registrar or the state's Office of Vital Statistics, depending on the state. The state issues two things. First, a certified copy. The document you receive, the one with the raised seal, the one you use to get a passport or a driver's license. This is what most people think of as their birth certificate. It is a copy. It is not the original. The original, sometimes called the vault copy, is retained by the state. It is stored in a secure facility. In most states, it is not accessible to the individual it documents without a formal request and identity verification. The state then reports the birth to the federal government through the National Center for Health Statistics, which is a division of the Centers for Disease Control, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. This reporting is statistical. It feeds into national vital statistics databases. But there is a second reporting chain, and this is where I began to lose my footing. Each state's Vital Statistics Office operates under the authority of a model law, the Model State Vital Statistics Act, which has been revised multiple times, most significantly in 1942 and 1977. This model law was developed in coordination with the federal government. And buried in the administrative structure, not in the law itself, but in the bureaucratic apparatus that surrounds it, is a detail that I cannot adequately explain. Birth certificates are assigned numbers. Those numbers follow patterns that vary by state, but are universally structured as tracking identifiers, similar in format to the serial numbers on financial instruments. The certificates are printed on security paper, banknote paper in many states, with watermarks, microprinting, and anti-counterfeiting features identical to those used on currency and bonds. Why does a public health document need anti-counterfeiting technology? Why does a record of a child's birth need to be printed on the same paper used for Treasury securities? The standard answer is identity fraud prevention. Birth certificates are primary identity documents. They must be secure against forgery. This is reasonable. This is probably correct. But I kept pulling the thread. Because the security features are not the only thing birth certificates share with financial instruments. They also share a filing system. This is where I need to be extremely careful, because I am entering territory where verifiable fact and unverifiable theory are close enough to touch. Verifiable fact. The Bureau of Vital Statistics was originally established within the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau is part of the Department of Commerce. The institutional origin of birth registration in the United States is commercial, not medical. Verifiable fact. The Social Security Act of 1935, 2 years after universal birth registration was achieved, created the Social Security number, which was tied directly to the birth certificate. To obtain a Social Security number, you needed a birth certificate. The SSN became the primary numerical identifier for every American citizen in tax records, employment records, banking records, and credit records. The birth certificate was the key that activated the SSN. The SSN was the key that activated economic participation. Verifiable fact. The Uniform Commercial Code, adopted progressively by all 50 states beginning in 1952, governs commercial transactions in the United States. The UCC uses specific legal terminology. It distinguishes between a person, a legal entity capable of holding rights and obligations, and a natural person, a human being. The UCC creates a framework in which persons can be debtors, creditors, secured parties, and collateral. The language is precise. The categories are specific. And the categories apply to every American who holds a Social Security number, which is every American who has a birth certificate, which is every American born after 1933. Now, here is where I reach the boundary of what I can verify. There is a theory associated with the sovereign citizen movement, with tax protest movements, and with various legal reform advocates, that the birth certificate is not merely a record of birth, but a financial instrument. That the registration of the birth creates a legal entity, a corporate person, distinct from the natural human being. That this corporate person is a trust, or a bond, or a security, registered with the state, and used as collateral against the national debt. That the all-capital spelling of your name on certain government documents indicates the corporate entity rather than the natural person. That the entire system is a form of involuntary servitude disguised as administrative procedure. Courts have rejected these arguments, repeatedly, consistently, often with explicit statements that the theories are legally frivolous. The IRS classifies many sovereign citizen tax strategies as fraud. Legal scholars have written detailed rebuttals. I am not telling you to believe these theories. I am not telling you they are correct. But I am telling you that I cannot explain why the filing system works the way it does. I cannot explain why a birth certificate, a public health document, is printed on banknote-grade security paper. I cannot explain why the institutional origin of birth registration is the Department of Commerce, not the Department of Health. I cannot explain why the birth certificate is the gateway document to a Social Security number that functions as a commercial identifier in a uniform commercial code that categorizes persons as potential debtors and collateral. Each individual fact has a reasonable explanation. Security paper prevents fraud. The Commerce Department housed the Census Bureau for administrative reasons. The SSN was a pension tracking number that expanded in scope over decades. The UCC is standard commercial law that applies the word person in a technical legal sense that does not mean what conspiracy theorists claim it means. Each explanation is reasonable, and I accept each one individually. But when I line them up, 1933, gold standard abandoned, birth registration mandated, Social Security created 2 years later, all names entered into a commercial code framework, all documents printed on security paper, all records originating from the Department of Commerce. I cannot make the sequence feel ordinary. I cannot make it feel like coincidence. And I cannot make it feel like public health. Let me tell you what else happened in 1933, because the year itself is a pattern. On March 6, 1933, 2 days after his inauguration, President Franklin Roosevelt declared a national bank holiday, closing every bank in the United States. On March 9th, Congress passed the Emergency Banking Act, giving the president broad authority over financial transactions and effectively ending the convertibility of dollars to gold for private citizens. On April the 5th, Executive Order 6102 made it illegal for American citizens to own more than 5 ounces of gold. Violators faced up to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Americans were required to surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper currency at $20.67 per ounce. The government then revalued gold to $35 per ounce, an instant 69% profit on confiscated metal. On June 5th, Congress passed a joint resolution nullifying gold clauses in all contracts. Every agreement in America that required payment in gold was retroactively voided. In that same year, 1933, the last holdout states were brought into compliance with mandatory birth registration. Every American born from that year forward would be documented, numbered, and entered into a filing system that originated in the Department of Commerce and terminated in a Social Security number that would follow them for life. Before 1933, an American citizen could hold gold, tangible, physical wealth that required no institution to validate it. After 1933, they could not. Their wealth was denominated in paper currency, whose value was determined by the Federal Reserve. Before 1933, an American could be born without being registered with the federal government. After 1933, they could not. Their legal existence was denominated in a document whose number was determined by the state. I am not drawing a conclusion. I am laying 2 timelines next to each other and noting that they are the same timeline. In the same year that the government claimed ownership of the physical wealth of its citizens, it completed a system that documented every citizen from birth. The currency was abstracted from gold to paper. The citizen was abstracted from person to number. Maybe these are parallel responses to the same crisis, the Great Depression requiring both financial and administrative reform simultaneously. Maybe the timing is a product of urgency, not design. But I have been researching long enough to recognize when a window appears. And 1933 is a window. I want to tell you what I do not believe. I do not believe that your birth certificate is worth millions of dollars in a secret government account. I have seen no credible evidence for this claim. The people who have attempted to access these supposed accounts through the Federal Reserve or the Treasury have been charged with fraud. Courts have ruled, unambiguously, that these accounts do not exist. I do not believe that writing your name in all capital letters on a legal document creates a separate corporate entity. This is a misreading of typography conventions, not a revelation about commercial law. I do not believe that the United States government secretly sold its citizens into financial bondage in 1933. This narrative requires a level of coordinated conspiracy that I do not find plausible, and it distracts from something more disturbing that does not require conspiracy at all. What I believe is this. The system was not designed with malice, it was designed with logic. A government that had just removed the physical backing of its currency needed to know, with precision, how many citizens it had, where they were, and what they were doing, because the stability of a fiat currency depends not on gold reserves, but on economic activity, and economic activity is generated by people, and people can only be measured if they are counted, and counting begins with registration, and registration begins at birth. The birth certificate is not a bond. It is something more mundane and, in its way, more unsettling. It is a ledger entry. It is the moment the state opens a file with your name on it. A file that will accumulate your Social Security contributions, your tax payments, your property records, your debt obligations, your criminal history, and your death certificate. The file opens at birth and closes at death. Everything between is recorded. You are not a financial instrument. You are a row in a database, and the database was made mandatory in the same year the money stopped being real. I have a copy of my birth certificate in a fireproof box in my closet. I took it out after I finished this research. I held it, I read it, my name, my parents' names, the hospital, the date, the time, down to the minute, the attending physician's signature, the registrar's stamp, the file number, printed in the upper right corner in a font that looks identical to the serial numbers on a $20 bill. It is the first document of my life. It is the document that made me visible to the state. Before that piece of paper was filed, I was a human being in a hospital. After it was filed, I was a citizen in a system. The paper is the boundary between those two conditions. My parents did not choose this. They were not asked whether they wanted me registered. The form was presented as a standard part of the hospital process. Fill this out, sign here, congratulations on your baby. The filing happened automatically. The number was assigned automatically. The reporting chain activated automatically. By the time my mother held me for the first time, the Department of Commerce already knew I existed. I think about the Americans born before 1900 who had no birth certificate, who entered the world and were known only to the people in the room, whose existence was recorded in a family Bible or a parish register or nowhere at all, who were, for the first years of their lives, invisible to every institution except their own community. They were not less real. They were not less American. They were not less human. They were simply unregistered. And unregistered meant that no system could find them, track them, tax them, conscript them, or count them without first going through the community that knew them. The birth certificate eliminated that gap. From 1933 forward, the state knew about you before your community did. The hospital filed the paperwork before your grandparents got the phone call. The number was assigned before your name was chosen, in some cases. The system saw you first. And it has been watching ever since, not maliciously, not through conspiracy, through procedure, through filing, through the quiet, automatic, utterly ordinary process of registering a human life the same way you register a deed, or a patent, or a vehicle, with a number on security paper in a system designed to track you from the moment you appear to the moment you don't. The birth certificate opens the file. The Social Security number indexes it. The tax returns populate it. The property records expand it. The death certificate closes it. Between the first document and the last, you are visible, countable, legible. A row in the database of the state, exactly as Maria Theresa intended when she numbered the houses, exactly as Napoleon intended when he numbered the streets, exactly as the Census Bureau intended when it numbered the people. The number on your birth certificate is the first number. The number on your house is the second. The Social Security number is the third. and each one was introduced for the same reason. Not to serve you, but to see you. I do not know what to do with this. I do not have a program, a movement, or a solution. I have a file in a fireproof box that documents the moment I became visible to a system I did not choose, cannot exit, and until 3 months ago had never thought to question. The file is open. It has been open since the day I was born. And the only thing I have learned, after 3 months of looking at the filing system that holds it, is that the file knows more about me than I know about the file. The paper remembers what the person forgets. The number tracks what the name cannot. And somewhere in a vault in my home state, the original copy, the one I have never seen, the one I am not permitted to access without proving that I am the person it documents, sits in a drawer alongside millions of others, each one printed on security paper, each one assigned a serial number, each one filed in a system that began in the Department of Commerce in the same year the gold standard died. Maybe that is coincidence. But the filing cabinet does not believe in coincidence, and neither anymore do I.